We're going to introduce ellipses in this video. So I'm just going to start with some basic movements that are going to help you with an ellipse, and then we'll talk about how to define it and what it is and all that. So the movement for an ellipse, it starts from your shoulder. Now, notice the way I'm holding the pencil. I'm not holding it like I'm going to write. I'm holding it like I'm drawing, and it has to do with your shoulder. And you want to be an arm's length away from the paper. You want to hold it like this, and then brace with your pinky, and then relax your other two fingers. And you should hold the pencil very, very lightly. You don't want to be gripping it like you're trying to hold on. You should almost be dropping it. And then you make this movement from your shoulder. So when you're doing an ellipse, you want to make some of them a little bit wider, a little bit taller. You can angle them. There's an idea where we can take what's called an axis, which in this case would just be a vertical line. But if you draw that line and then put your hand at hold your pencil straight up, and you make that gesture, the ellipse itself will line up perpendicular to this line. So if we have a vertical line and then we do this, if we have an angled line, all we do is adjust the angle of our arm, and we'll end up with an ellipse that follows that angle. Because sometimes you're going to have an ellipse that's more vertical. If you have a cylinder that's on its side or something like that. So that's the gesture that you want to start practicing all the time. All right, so now take a look at this plate. So when we're talking about ellipses, we have to define it. So, this plate is obviously a circle. An ellipse is when you have a circle that you're viewing in space. And one of the features of an ellipse is that as long as your station point is fixed, you're not moving around, at your eye level, a circle in space is just a horizontal line. As the ellipse moves down, or you move up, the cylinder or the ellipse itself gets fuller and more open and rounder as it goes down. And the same thing will happen if your eye level is like here and you're looking up at it. The same thing will happen. So those are characteristics of ellipses that we need to figure out how to take advantage of. But first, we'll go back to this scenario where we've made these gestural sort of marks, and now we'll just pick one of these and tighten it up a little bit. And usually what happens is if you're right-handed, you'll have a pretty easy time with the left-hand side of your ellipse. But you'll struggle a little bit with the right-hand side. And if you're kind of savvy, you can just flip the paper over and do it that way. It's a little bit easier, but I'm going to have a go at this right-hand side. And you want to make sure that from the short axis that they're the same distance away, so, or the minor axis. You want to make sure that center line is halfway in between. And once you've done that gesture, sometimes it takes a little while to work out the specifics of the ellipse so it's nice and symmetrical on both sides. And you can see my line work got a little bit thick, but you can come in with an eraser and tighten it up. Looks like maybe the left-hand side needs to tighten up a little bit. All right, so it's worth taking some time to refine the ellipses and get them just right. But the basics are kind of there. So another way to think about doing this is if we combine what we're doing with these gestures, if we combine that with our observations and our measuring. Let's say we've measured out where we've sort of plotted out the specifics of a given ellipse. So let's say the top of the ellipse is going to be here. We know that the bottom of the ellipse is going to be here, and it's this wide, and it's this wide over here. Very similar to this one, but for our purposes, that's okay. So now we've made a box where we've established its limits. So when we go to make the ellipse, we just keep it inside the box. And then you just find halfway real quick. Just measure. And this is a halfway. And by dividing it into quadrants, now all you have to do is define it one quadrant at a time. So do your ellipse gesture, and then you can, the only place it touches the outside is those four corners, or those intersections. Go there. As long as your box's proportions are correct, this sometimes makes it a lot easier. And while I'm doing this, since this is a video, there's a little bit of distortion in the drawing just because the camera is at an angle. So if you're seeing that, try not to let it bother you too much. The ellipse should be pretty symmetrical, the same on both sides. So now this is an idea that it's just, it sets up some guides for you, so you can kind of have a slightly more accurate go of it. But there's not really that much of an advantage. It's just something that people do, so I wanted to show you. But actually, if we want to go a little bit further and we look at the plate again, what's really going on when you're looking at a cylinder or an ellipse is that when any two things are equal in their size or their distance or whatever, when we're drawing, the two things that are equal, the one that's closer to you is going to be bigger. So if we think about the circle, if we cut it in half, here the top half versus the bottom half would be the same. If we're doing this, the front half versus the back half, the front half would be bigger and the back half would be smaller. So that kind of brings up a conundrum, because if we draw the ellipse like this, the top half and the bottom half are the same. Here, we drew it two-dimensionally. The top half and the bottom half are the same. But if we approach it from a slightly different perspective and say that instead of drawing the ellipse into a two-dimensional plane, if we establish for our ellipse a plane that deals with 3 dimensions, so think about, erase a little bit. Think about, this is like a one-point perspective plane. If we draw a line that connects the corners, and this is something we're going to get into more later. There's some cool little tricks that happen here. And then we just make sure that that's halfway. And now, so that establishes halfway this way, but like if this is 1.5 inches, that's always going to be 1.5 inches. We know that that's halfway. because we know that this corner's no closer to us or further away than that one. But the front half and the back half's further away. So where this happens, we draw a horizontal across, and we can see that the front is bigger than the back. So we do the same thing we did here, except we're doing it in a three-dimensional plane, and our ellipse, sometimes it takes a little practice to work out exactly how to fit this in, but we're still working with the same quadrant idea. And our ellipse still looks pretty good. But this one sort of deals with the space the way it actually is, as opposed to the flattening out abstraction that we're getting out of this part. So that's an interesting idea, and we're gonna come back to it. I have one more thing that I want to show you, and that has to do with the idea of a cylinder. So if you're drawing a cylinder, remember we had the plate at your eye level. An ellipse is a horizontal line, but they get fuller as they go down. So if we have an ellipse like this, that's going to be the top, let's say, of a cylinder, and we drop this down, and it doesn't matter how far down we go, but if our ellipse is going to be down here, a really, really important idea is going to be always draw your ellipses all the way through. Even if you're drawing like a soda can or a soup can, you know, here you're looking down at it, you can see the top, but the bottom part, you can only see the front of the ellipse. You're guaranteed to get the ellipse wrong if you only draw half of it. You have to draw the whole thing all the way through. So we know that it needs to be a little bit taller than this one. So, but the width is the same. So when we do our ellipse, we just need to make sure that it's a little bit bigger, or we should say rounder. And I'm exaggerating the realism of this for the purposes of illustrating it. But if we can get that ellipse drawn all the way through, and we can just isolate it and just say, all right, let's just get this ellipse, let's get it perfect. Let's get that ellipse just right. And now we can strengthen the parts that we see and lighten the parts that we wouldn't. I think we need to come in a little bit more. All right, so I know that that's exaggerated and that it's starting to distort in the camera. As we go further away, our ellipses are starting to stretch and wobble. But anyway, that's the big idea. And whenever you're drawing an ellipse, just remember, always draw it all the way through. Don't just draw the front. Like if you're doing this, sorry, we'll start here. If we just do this, and then come down, and then only draw the front, you might be able to get it right, but it'll just be luck. Now, a couple things that people do routinely in their ellipses that makes them wrong is sometimes people draw them so that they're kind of like, they'll do their gesture, but they'll end up with like an egg. So they'll have an ellipse that kind of looks like that. And that is no good. And then what a lot of other people do, and sometimes the same people, they'll have an ellipse that's kind of like this. And it'll be nice and round at the top, and it'll be straight in the front. I see this all the time. And it's not even close to being right. Another classic is the football. So you make points on the ends of your ellipses. And none of these things are a circle in space. They're not even close. So avoid these at all costs. Stick with stuff like this.